Have you been searching for a podcast? Do you want to learn from some great content creators? Well, you've come to the right place. Indie Podcaster with your host, Jeff Townsend, the Indie Podcast Father.
Welcome to Indie Podcaster with Jeff Townsend. Today, I'm filling in. This is Rena Friedman-Watts, host of the Better Call Daddy podcast. If you have an inspirational father, some daddy drama, or you might want to learn a lesson from my dad, check out bettercalldaddy.com. Today, Jeff is sharing content that Jeff, Greg, and Tanner made for Podcast Garage. Make sure you check out Jeff's Twitter Spaces. Twitter Spaces are the happening place to be lately. Podcasting Power Hour every Monday at 9 p.m. Eastern, hosted on Jeff Townsend's Twitter page. Now, enjoy the episode.
Where are those guys? We were supposed to start recording 10 minutes ago. Oh, here he comes. Tanner Campbell, one of Podcast Magazine's top 22 podcast influencers.
Good morning, good morning, good morning.
Hey, Tanner, you ready to record Podcast Garage? Why are you looking at me like that? You don't remember me, do you?
You're you.
Oh my God, you really don't. I'm Greg, creator of Indie Drop-In Network and the co-host of this show with you and the Podcast Father. Still nothing? Okay, well, the studio's in the back. We'll get started when Jeff gets here. Oh, finally.
I'm your host, Jeff, a.k.a. Podcast Father.
Oh, not you too. You're a co-host along with me and Tanner. Just go ahead and go back to the studio. Jeez, well, I guess I better get in there.
All right, this is exciting that we got a whole new adventure here in front of us, guys. I'm Jeff. I have Tanner with me. He is one of the most influential people in podcasting. He doesn't say that himself, but it'll all make sense in time. And he has a podcast, Podcasting Sucks. Tanner, thanks for joining us. You drinking some tea there?
Just some ice water, pal.
I was hoping it was some sweet tea or unsweet tea. And we also have Greg with us, old Greg from Indie Drop-In, the $1 million studio behind him. How's it going, Greg?
Old Greg. Like, this is not how you start this off. And by the way, there's an exclamation point after Podcasting Sucks, so it's Podcasting Sucks!
Also, you say old Greg. Good old Greg, not old Greg.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. Next, he'll be calling me Smalls.
Well, old Greg is like a skit that was famous, I don't know, like probably over 10 years ago now. Maybe I'm showing my age here. So before we kick things off, we only have to do it the right way. Let's just get the sponsor of this episode going here. Tell us about yourself, Greg. Tell us what you offer, pal.
Yeah, so if you're a true crime, paranormal, scary, or comedy podcaster and you're looking to grow your show, you can submit an episode to Indie Drop-In. We will play the full episode of your show to an embedded base of listeners looking for your content. Then, if they like you, they'll follow you. And guess what? It's 100% free. I actually pay Tanner and Jeff to get your content. If you can believe that. I don't know how I got roped into being the creator of Indie Drop-In, but I will like to promote your show. How was that, Jeff?
That's good. Tanner, what do you think?
I think you did a better job than I do.
Definitely does a better job than I do. I can hardly even talk.
Yeah. Well, no, I think you do a great job. I've heard your ads so many times that now I just replay them in my head. But for anyone interested in submitting a show, just go to indiedropin.com/creators. Just follow the form and I'll take it from there.
Let's get to the great guest that's with us, though. It's Dave from Beer in Front Podcast. Thanks for joining us, brother.
Oh, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Are you getting well? I know you've been sick.
Getting there slowly but surely. It's like 5 weeks into COVID, still headaches constantly. My smell is jacked up, but man, we're getting
On the latest
there.
episode of his podcast, he talked about how he hates the smell and taste of ketchup, and now he can smell ketchup even more strongly than he could before. So the opposite results for Dave. He's not happy about it. He doesn't smell pizza any better than he did, just ketchup.
No, but like I was mentioning before we went on, now it's everything I smell 24/7. It's like there's cigarette smoke in my nose, and no one in my building smokes. I'm in an apartment. No one smokes, but it's all I do is smell cigarettes, and it's driving me up the wall. I can't smell beer, but I can smell cigarettes.
He's like, which one of you son of a guns has got ketchup right now?
Who is smoking ketchup cigarettes in this building?
Oh, gosh, that sounds awful. Oh, my. Anyway, so this is kind of a new thing we're trying out here where we reach out to somebody who's interested in getting some help with their podcast. And Dave, you responded. we'll kick things off by why did you respond, Dave?
The feedback that I get, some has been audio quality that they don't like. Well, I think it's pretty decent, but I'm not an expert, so I don't know. I would also like to know maybe a little bit more about promotion, but mostly like what other people think of content, if there's something constructive that I could do better or get rid of. Same thing with audio. Like if there's something that you feel maybe you should try this or, do something else, then by all means, I'm all ears.
All right. So why don't you explain the concept of your podcast real quick and kind of how you came up with it?
I came up with it. I don't work in the beer industry. I'm just an every person. I've always liked craft beer. And a lot of people that you hear talk about it get too technical. They just don't enjoy the beer that's in front of them. They want to talk about how this version is different from the one that came out in 2012. Who remembers that far back? Is what you have in front of you good? Do you enjoy it? Then it's a good beer. So I talk more about like older classic beers, some new beers that I like. And then I started it right before COVID. So I couldn't go to breweries, go to things like that. So I kind of had to dial it back where I'll talk about things happening in the beer world. And then I call out hypocrites, people that I don't really care for, or some odd news, and I call them out as a jagoff this week.
So explain that, the jagoff. Well, that's like a significant thing for you.
Yes, it's, I believe Pittsburgh came up with the term first, so they would call us people in Chicago jagoffs for stealing their term, but it's like a jamoke, a clown. Yeah, it's just a jagoff. Somebody cuts you off in the car, you call them a jagoff.
You damn jagoff. Go jag off somewhere else. So let's start out with the basis of the podcast here. So the cover art, Dave, did you make that?
I did the star logo, which is the Chicago Star with the beer glass inside. And then I was putzing around. I didn't like it, so I went to Fiverr and had some help with the fonts and everything else. And then I kind of tweaked it from there, where their background was just a plain background, where now I use, it's kind of like a weathered paper, like almost like a beer coaster. So that I incorporated. So it's part me, part Fiverr.
So I know I'll just start off on this. I know from a marketing standpoint, a lot of people do like picture of an individual on something. So I think that incorporated with the beer is not bad. Pass it off to Tanner now.
Well, yeah, you just said incorporated with the beer. And when I'm looking at this image in full screen, when I'm not looking at it within a podcast player app where it's very tiny, I can very clearly see the glass within the star, and that's a beer glass, and the word beer is in the title. It's very clear that this is about beer, but I'm going to be honest that while I like seeing you in the shot, I don't like that you're not holding beer. It's almost like when you see somebody do a commercial for, let's say, hamburgers or something, but they're not taking a bite of the hamburger. You almost believe it a little less. So for your artwork, I think it's fine. I love the style of it. I love that you're in it. You've got tats up the arm. I don't know why you seem like a dude that's like, you're a gruff guy from Chicago. You're not afraid to speak your mind. I really like your personality in the show. I would just like to see you holding a beer stein or something in that photo.
Like he is right now.
There you go.
Yes.
What about you, Greg?
It's your turn, sunshine.
I agree with both of you, really. So my biggest issue with the cover art really is just that you're not holding a beer. I mean, it's exactly what Tanner said.
Okay.
I don't care for the star. I think when it's small, it's distracting. You don't really know what it's supposed to be. So I would ditch that. I would just hold a beer, honestly. That's what I would do.
So what do you think there? Like, instead of the star, his arms may be extended and he's, half cheersing almost?
Yeah, I think it needs to be an inviting photo, because I've surveyed the competition, which I hate using that word in a podcast.
Which one? Surveyed? Me too. I hate that word.
Yeah. Yeah. No one likes to survey anything, but nobody used their face in their podcast about beer that I could find. It was all graphical images of beers overflowing or of a cheers or something. Right. So I think that you having your face on there is absolutely unique. I'm with Tanner. I love the tats. I think it gives you weird beer credibility.
Yeah.
So I would honestly tell the graphic designer to punch up the colors, and I would hold it up, and just embrace it, man. Like that's what I would do. I think you are the show, so you might as well be on the cover art.
Okay. And the reason I did the star because being from Chicago, and that's from the Chicago flag. But if no one else knows that, then they don't know it and they just think it's clip art or whatever.
Right. And that's something that we all do with our marketing, especially when we first start out. We make assumptions about what people will understand what certain symbolism is. And you just hit the nail on the head. I had no idea. You just said that. And my neighbor's from Chicago and he has a flag out front. As soon as you said that, I was like, oh, yeah, that does make sense. But you're right. I'm from Maine. I live in Colorado. I had no idea what that star was from. I thought maybe you were mimicking the style of that. What's the brewery that has like a very Russian look to it in their typeface and such?
I mean, there's Old Rasputin. That's a Russian Imperial Stout out west.
I might be thinking of just a single IPA from some other one, but I thought you were trying to mimic the style of that particular bottle, which is where I took it. So yeah, maybe dropping that star and filling it with, because you've got one arm crossed over the other. So if that crossed over arm just had a beer in it lifted up, I think that would look a lot better.
Okay. What about if I had a beer glass with the logo on it, or just a plain glass?
Yeah, I think that would be cool. That'd be cool to see if if the image was large enough in the viewport, however someone was looking at it. Like right now I'm looking in Google search, so it's very big for me, but that probably won't translate really well in a tiny thing, but cool to have it there anyway. I don't think it's going to take away or add from it.
Yeah, personal preference at that point. I think the symbolism of your beer drinking is what you're going after, not the symbolism of the star and the cup. I think you could turn it from an 8 to a 9. I don't know how you get it to a 10. That's a 10 is a home run. It's usually by accident. So I always say 8 to 9.
And I think we should be clear that I think all of us think it's already good artwork.
Yeah. Way better than most. One of the reasons we chose you, by the way.
Okay.
If I'm just being honest.
And congratulations on this is your first podcast, right?
Correct. Yes.
Congratulations for not putting a microphone in the artwork. Well done.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll only want to play that one if you actually have a podcast about podcasting.
I mean, the microphone with the headphones on top of it wouldn't have worked.
Yeah, right. You could have put a headset on the beer mug, and that would have been probably a lot of logos that are out there for this sort of thing.
Oh, I think I saw that when I was surveying.
So I do want to I kind of have like an opinion on the star thing, but I'm going to get back to that later on when we get more to the content piece. I kind of want to segue to the sound quality, the audio piece of this. I think it's first like we just said, first podcast. I think it's pretty damn good for a first podcast. These two guys know a lot more about that. I'm just the hype guy.
I'm the audiophile, real nitpicky guy, so I don't know if I should go first. Greg, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll go. So, I mean, I can immediately tell you're not using a dynamic mic, or it's turned up way too high and too far away from you. So, if you look at my mic, look at Tanner's mic, right? This is what you're going for, about a fist away, off angle, so you're not kind of spitting in it. And when I hear you talk, I can hear mouth noises. I think you could really improve that just by technique. But like Jeff said, I mean, I'm being hypercritical. I know Tanner's going to take it to the next level. If you don't have a headache yet, you'll have one soon. But first question, what kind of mic do you have? Because I want to check my dynamic versus.
I have the Elgato 3, so just a USB mic.
Yeah, it's sitting on your desk.
Yeah, it's sitting on my desk. I do have the arm, but I just put it on the mount for now because I have the windscreen background just to cover up because we have the heat going on. So I wanted to knock that out a bit.
Yeah, we can hear it, but a denoiser it's very constant, so a denoiser will take that out of there. Tanner, what do you think? I mean, my step one is get yourself a dynamic mic, and all of a sudden you'll go from like dude in Chicago to a broadcaster. I mean, look at how I sound and how Tanner sounds. It's not like we're voice actors.
Same things they've said to me too, by the way, man.
I mean, I am a voice actor. How dare you?
Oh yeah, Jeff, your mic sucks too, by the way.
Dave, I have a couple questions for you.
Yes.
First of all, how far away is that mic?
Right now, normally I would say maybe 9 inches away.
9 inches away. Okay. And it's off to your side, it seems like, too, because you're speaking at us. Normally, you'd probably be speaking into the microphone, right?
Normally, yeah, I would speak right into it, yes, when I'm recording.
So some of the things that I noticed when I was listening to episodes were the heat thing or a fan or whatever's running in the background. I can really hear the tone of the room. I can hear the room noise. One of the ways that you can combat that is to get closer to your microphone, something like 3 to 5 inches away from your mic if you can. Okay. I also thought I noticed a lot of odd compression in your recordings. Can I ask what you use to record your podcast?
Yeah, I record it on GarageBand, and then I edit it with Audacity.
It's odd because the sound quality sounded like you were recording it in Zoom or something like that. Can I ask what format you're recording it in?
I record it, I convert it to a wave, and then I do the editing and everything from there, and then I convert it to an MP3.
But you are recording directly into GarageBand?
Correct, yes. And then, I export that as a wave file to do the editing.
It seems like an unnecessary step.
Okay.
Because you can record right into Audacity, can't you, Tanner?
Yes, you can.
I just, when I was putzing around with the two, I thought the quality sounded better with like the reverb and everything, hearing it played back with recording it into GarageBand as opposed to just Audacity.
So quick question. Are you monitoring your own voice right now? Can you hear yourself speaking? Or not right now, but when you are recording?
When I'm recording, yes.
Not right now, you can't though.
On here when I'm talking, yeah, it's pushing red.
Okay. So what you wind up doing when you get closer to a microphone is you increase what's called the signal to noise ratio. You make it greater. And then when you drop your audio file, you're recording into Audacity and you use their denoising tool. Do you use their denoising tool?
No, what I do, and just from reading different things, once I import it into Audacity, I do a high pass filter. I mean, and this is the order that I do it. So maybe that's part of the problem. I'll do like the high pass filter, then I do the compressor, and then the loudness normalization. And then from there, like I'll try to reduce the noise of the initial fan or take up my breath noises, things like that.
When you say reduce the noise of the initial fan, how are you doing that?
In Audacity, I'll just do noise reduction. I'll get the noise profile from the first 5 seconds where I'm not talking and then do the rest of the clip with that.
So based on what I've listened to of the 2 episodes that I heard, if you're really already doing all of those things and the order in which you said that, the only thing I would change is I would do the denoise first, because essentially what you do if you denoise after your compression, compression is the process of reducing dynamic range. So you're making things similarly loud, more similarly loud than they were before. So you're actually kind of increasing or rather decreasing that signal to noise ratio. So if you try to denoise something that has already been made louder through the process of compression, you're giving the denoiser a harder job to do. So you should probably run the denoiser first before you do anything else. And then I would say if that is the order in which you are doing things and you're already doing those things, other than making that denoising changing in the order of operations, would be to get closer to your microphone. And I think if you can do those 2 things, I think your audio quality is going to come up quite a bit. And I would record directly into Audacity. There's absolutely no reason to record into GarageBand if you're not using any of the tools in GarageBand and then just exporting it and having to use 2 pieces of software. It doesn't make any sense.
Okay. I mean, I do the intro part with the music that I change each week based on the beer that I have. So I think with that, I'll still have to do GarageBand, but then every other thing, I'll just go right into Audacity this week.
No, you should be able. Well, let me ask, where are you getting the music files from?
I just did it myself through GarageBand.
Oh, so you're composing it yourself in GarageBand.
I just used their loops and, did the different backgrounds from there.
So what I would do then is I would compose those loops in GarageBand and just export the loop and then drag and drop both of those things into Audacity.
All right.
Then you'll have a bunch of either WAV files or MP3 files in your file folder. And you just drop them where you want to put them in Audacity.
All right. Works for me. I'll try that this week.
I also want to mention the in-between segments, which I love that you have segments. I think too few podcasters divide their content up into useful segments. I love that you have some music stingers between those segments. I think that's cool. I think that since the segments are so normal, they seem to be through every episode. You have these same segments in every episode. I'd like to see the segment stinger, that little intro to the segment, jazzed up a little bit. Like you always have Jag Off of the Week. You always have, beer in the news. Mm-hmm. I think it would be cool if those were a little bit more produced, maybe different music. You could have some VO, something like, and now it's time for beer of the week, something silly, but something that I think would be endearing to your audience. You could do it in your own style because you can just drag and drop those resources in every time you use them. It's not going to, take you any effort more than just making them the first time and then dropping them in where you need them. Okay. And then I can hear your mouse click a lot. I can hear between something. I think you're making a cut, but I think you're not making the cut broad enough. And so I can hear when you go from one topic to another within a segment, I can hear your mouse click. So I assume that you're doing something like switching tabs within your browser or something. You were looking at something.
Switching tabs, or I'll have my notes up. So I'm going to my notes so I make sure I don't miss anything.
So I would just make sure that no problems in clicking your mouse. That's fine. Just make sure that mouse click is getting removed in the editing process.
Okay.
A dynamic mic would really help this.
So what about, dynamic mic, what would you suggest that's reasonable for Dave?
Well, do you have a budget for a mic, Dave? Like, do you have an idea of how much you would want to spend?
I probably would, couple hundred.
Oh, that's more than enough. Audio Technica makes AT2040. It's a dynamic microphone. It's a newer one too. I think they've modeled it after Rode's Pod Mic, and it's pretty good. I've heard it. It sounds good. I've never used one, but I trust people who own them and have given me feedback on them and told me, whether or not they're good mics. So I would recommend, running down to your local Guitar Center because they probably have it there, and giving it a shot. And remember, if it doesn't work for you, you can always send it back. There's no worries there. People's return policies are pretty liberal these days. But that microphone will cost you $100, and I think it's going to upgrade your quality a lot, especially if you practice that better mic technique. And do you have your mic on a boom?
No, it's just on a regular mic stand.
So tabletop mount is just sitting there?
Correct.
Would you be willing to invest in a swing arm? Do you have a way to connect that to your desk?
I actually do have a swing arm. I just haven't used it in a bit. So yeah, I could always reconnect it back to there.
It's easier to get it out of the way. It's easier to get it close. If it's on the desk, it's very awkward to have it. It gets in the way of you trying to read whatever you're trying to read or work on your keyboard because it's got that big desk footprint. So I think putting it on a boom would probably just make your life a little easier.
Okay. Then when I get that, I'll be going to you, Jeff, to put out who needs a podcast mic. I'll send it to somebody free like I did my last one.
Oh yeah. I remember. I forgot about that. We hooked somebody. Yeah. I don't remember who that even was.
You know what? It was some young person in Italy, of all places, which I'm like, oh, no, I didn't qualify this by saying U.S. only. So I think it was like $45 to ship the thing. But I'm like, well, if somebody's getting their start out, that's fine.
At least you followed through. That was nice of you. And it's a contest you could even do to your own listeners. You could say, hey, you guys have upgraded mics. Maybe somebody out there is thinking about starting a podcast after hearing mine. I'd love to give this to you, drop your name in a hat. It would be a good way for you to potentially also build a mailing list, get some idea of who your listeners are. That could be cool.
Okay.
That's all I've got for audio quality, Jeff. What's next?
Thanks for reminiscing on the old times there, Dave. I remember that now. That was awesome. So next, I kind of want to talk about obviously we got to get to the content piece, the concept of the podcast itself. I like it. I think it's great. And I think that there's a couple different approaches you really can take with this. I like the Chicago piece of it. And just from knowing a lot of marketing data, that city is very marketable, very passionate city. You know that. To me, I play into that a little bit more than you do, Dave, in my opinion. If you're doing that, though, obviously you're not going to ditch the star like they were saying earlier. But from the content piece, I think there's that approach, right, where you can really just dive into the Chicago area more and kind of take advantage of that, of the local theme, because I know that Tanner, Greg, and I have talked about this. Regionally local podcasts can do very, very well. And I think that's something that you have a possibility of doing if done right with your podcast. You have to be a little bit more on topic, I guess. But nevertheless, it could be, a different person from Chicago every week that you're talking about something from Chicago, incorporating it with the beer. So I think there's that approach. I will also get Greg's opinion on this. I mean, there's a lot more out there. I've got other opinions, but I don't want to hog it all up.
No, I think you're opening up a huge can of worms here. And it's good to talk about this because there is this new, I hate to call it new, but there's this trend of localizing podcasts. And I joke because it's like what people really wanted was radio on demand for their local city. And we've just taken a huge circle to kind of get back to it. But, it really just depends on what your goals are. And I think that's really what my question would revolve around is what do you want to do with this thing? Like, who are you trying to reach? Do you want to turn it into a job? Are you just trying to drink beer with a microphone? Like, if you had to close your eyes and manifest the end point of this podcast, what would that look like? And there's no wrong answers, just for you.
Eventually to the point where I could go to a different brewery, maybe not every episode, but once a month. Okay, this month I'm going to talk to Tanner over at this brewery and we're going to talk about his new beer, or I'm going to talk to Jeff or Greg and we'll talk to them. Eventually, if I could spend more time on it and less time at my real job, but that's, we'll have to have health insurance for that. So, that's going to be a bit.
Okay. So let me just tell you what I just heard. You would like this podcast to be a commercial success enough to replace your day job, whatever that number might be.
Correct.
That's the goal.
That's the goal. Whether it's realistic or not is another story.
Oh, it's realistic. I mean, there's easier ways to make money than podcasting. I'm sure you know that.
Digging ditches, for example, is a great way.
But I absolutely think that there is potential for nearly any podcast, if it's niched appropriately, to provide a full-time income for a adult. Not a young person, but, a real life contributing adult.
Oh, whoa. Greg must have kids who he doesn't like. You just said a real life contributing adult.
Well, you hear about people podcasting and they say they're podcasting full time, but it doesn't generate an income. They have other means to sustain themselves. That's what I'm trying to say. Like, as the job. Like, the podcast is your sole source of income. That's what I'm trying to say. Not, that you retired from your day job at Anheuser-Busch, right? Where you did well your whole life and, you've contributed to society for 40 years and now you're going to start a podcast. That's what I'm saying. So back to content, I think you have to figure out who it is that you want to speak to, because right now your podcast to me is disjointed, and I'm just going to be very direct because I think that you deserve it. I think your podcast is good enough to improve, right? It's over this. Like, I will on this show at some point tell somebody to just pack it up and do something else, I'm sure. But I think your podcast is to a level where it could be a commercial success. I think there are a lot of, to Jeff's point, local places that I think would spend money promoting activities. I think there's huge national brands that lack alcohol-centric places to spend money because it's a very sensitive category for ads. So yeah, I think it's a good niche.
Okay.
What I think you got to figure out is who you want to speak to. Because you're not speaking to the home brewer. We know that because you're not really talking about home brewing. I heard one episode where you gave me the price of aluminum for some reason, right? Like, I don't think we need that. I mean, I'm just being direct, like who is that for? And I thought, oh man, this guy, he's in the beer industry, right? Like the cost of corn is making a difference to his listeners. But then I kept listening more and I think, no, this guy's talking to beer enthusiasts, I think. And you don't want anyone to go through that mental hurdle, right? That is the mental hurdle you have to avoid. And then just to be blunt, the jack off of the week, I would cut that whole thing. I don't think it targets anyone in particular. I think it only has the potential to irritate people, even if it's hilarious, which I heard some that was. There's no good way to deliver that to where it would help you, right? It can only harm you. That's the thing. And it's, it's your show. It's just my opinion. But yeah, and I think these really hard decisions, like if you look at your podcast as a business, right? We have a current example of a company. I don't want to talk about who they are, but they got into an endeavor and they decided within 6 months they didn't want to do it anymore. They have a fail fast mentality. And I think that if you look at your podcast like a business, you have to look at it the same way. Like, you can try things out and you can figure out, do they work or don't they work? Right. And I went back and I looked at Podbean. I looked at your numbers. Your show isn't like flying off the shelves, if I'm just being honest, right? It's better. It grows slow. What I'm saying is when you build something for someone else, and no matter what it is, you have to keep that person as your North Star. So step one in this endeavor is figuring out who that person is first, right? I think it's the beer enthusiast. I've listened to, I don't know, maybe 15 of your episodes, by the way. Like, been listening to them all week off and on. And I really think you're speaking to the beer enthusiast because you talk a lot about the different types of beer, new beer coming out, which I think is good.
The beer news is good too. I like the beer news, Greg.
So I like the beer news when it's about beer drinking. I don't like the beer news when it's about beer stuff, right? So I like it. I like it when it's about like new beers coming out and your personal opinions on them, which I think is really what people are here for, right? You say like, since I'm in St. Louis, I'll just use Anheuser-Busch as an example. InBev, Anheuser-Busch just sold to InBev isn't interesting, okay, to the normal person. But Anheuser-Busch coming out with a new such and such beer, and I looked at it and I'm thinking it's going to be a lager. It's going to be this. It's going to be, maybe it'll be good for summertime. It's going to be limited release. These types of things would be super interesting for a beer enthusiast. Tanner, you have something to say?
I would argue as a beer enthusiast myself that something like what you just said, Anheuser-Busch being bought by InBev, which I think has already happened.
Yeah, that's why I used it as an example.
That would that is something that the beer enthusiast community would actually care about. They would care about that because most of the beer enthusiast community are lovers of craft, small business, small breweries. They want to hear about that struggle. They want to hear about like issues with the 3-tier distribution system and such. Those are things that they would actually care about. But the price of aluminum, maybe not. The artwork on the can, probably. That might be cool for them to hear about a little bit of the background of like where the artwork on the can came from. The price of corn and malt, no, probably not. Well, not malt, but of corn, no. But some of that industry stuff is of interest to lovers of beer for sure, especially craft beer, which is most lovers of beer. You know, the people who want their beer to taste like something other than beer.
Yeah, the question is where do you draw that line? Because really, even if you think the beer enthusiast would like mergers and acquisitions, I think you could do that if you somehow equated it to what you thought was going to happen with the beer.
Yes, I think that's why they like it too. I think they'd say, oh man, big old mean InBev got the little guy again. Damn it. And how is that going to affect the recipe? Like, yeah, that kind of stuff is definitely interesting.
But just reading the news, which is what has seemed, I think lacks that personality.
So just a real quick summary. We're saying that there's industry news that the beer enthusiasts would care about, but that we have to find a way to divide that. Price of corn, prices of aluminum, not so much. Acquisitions of little guys by big guys, how does it affect the recipe? That kind of stuff, probably interesting.
Yeah. And the only reason I did the aluminum stuff, because there were big articles that came out that week on like Bloomberg, other things saying how this is going to affect the craft beer industry where they might not be able to get the cans that they were using last year, and the cans are going to be available are going to go up. So I thought, well, that's an interesting enough thing where it affects every beer drinker that's out there. But I mean, if you don't think something that technical belongs, then I'll just stick with, the meat and potatoes part.
Yeah, I think we're nitpicking, and content is tricky. Like, I don't know if you noticed, but Tanner and I already had a disagreement about what should be in the news, right? So content is very, very tricky, and this is why I say trial and error is absolutely critical. I find myself, and this is just for me, that when I was running my fandom podcast, which I did over 2 years and hundreds of episodes, almost 1 million downloads, by the way. So it was a decent sized show is what I'm trying to tell you. When I did the news, it was because I didn't have anything else to talk about. There was something going on that like I was sick, or I didn't do my homework. I just, to me, the news is something that it's really other people's work that you're collecting and just regurgitating. I know there are tons of news shows. I don't want to put a weird vibe in your brain about news. I personally don't like to hear news in podcasts. I would listen to a news podcast if I wanted, news style podcasts. I would listen to you because I'm interested in your opinions on beer, the beer itself. And I think that's where I would start with this whole thing if it were me.
Dave, when you start the podcast, you talk about the badges and the collecting in the apps. I assume you're talking about the Tapped app or something similar, right?
Untapped, yeah.
I wonder if you could replace the news segment with something like the trending best beer of the week. Is that a thing that app does? I don't use it myself. My neighbor does that.
I'm sure you can, but that's even owned by InBev right now. So a lot of that isn't really accurate. You're still going to get the same beers every week.
Well, maybe that could be part of the discussion. Oh, Untapped says that this week, the beer of the week is Budweiser. Yeah, right. Like having that conversation. But when they get the nail on the head, maybe you could say positive things about that. The Jagoff section that Greg mentioned, I'm not offended by it. I think that what it is, though, is something that is either divisive or isn't. And I don't know if that's 50-50 or 90-10. If it's 90-10, you probably don't care, but you can't know what it is. And ultimately, it's just negative. You had mentioned that it runs the risk of including some things which are political, which for me, unless you're an expressed political podcast, I think that politics and religion possibly are the number one and two things that are going to have somebody show up and be like, this is not what I showed up for, and maybe even get upset about it. So as a fast and hard rule, don't talk about politics of any kind unless they're very relative maybe to beer production. Perhaps there's some, inside baseball going on in that world. But, talking about COVID, other than, of course, you had been dealing with it yourself, or things that are more broadly political, I try to keep that stuff out because it's not why people showed up. And part of why people show up is probably escaping that stuff.
Yeah, there's no way it can help you, right? Like that's how you should look at all of your segments, right? Is it for that person listening? And how can it help? How can it help the show talk to that one person, right? Just have one person in your mind. Is it a 40-something busy dad who's a beer enthusiast but can't keep up with everything coming out, and maybe he needs a list of interesting and cool beers that are available nationally? That you can say, hey, by the way, if you're in the South, it's at Kroger. If you're in the North, it's at H-E-B or whatever, vice versa. It just depends on who you're talking to. And I think that your persona is the first thing that you're going to have to figure out, because then you can wrap the whole show around it.
Jeff Townsend here, and I'm excited to talk to my good friend Mark Binder. I'm just kidding. His name is Mark Binder. He doesn't like it when I say that. Mark is the creator, I'm going to say owner just because it sounds entrepreneur-y, of Podtrix, the podcast hosting platform. Thanks for joining us, man. I'm excited to hear about this new Podtrix feed import feature that you're going to share with me and us, everybody, the world. Share it with the world, Mark.
World, behold this. The Podtrix feed importer, it's really simple. The Podtrix feed importer is really exciting because it's how you migrate your existing podcast feed to Podtrix hosting. All you got to do is the URL that you would submit to Spotify or Apple or Overcast or whatever, you paste that into the little pop-up that shows up in your show, and you say import. The system then goes and will start importing all of your episodes, whether it be 10 episodes or 10,000 episodes. It will pull in every single episode, all of the audio, your descriptions, your categories. Everything is moved into Podtrix seamlessly and is ready for publishing. This feature is already live right now and is available to anybody who wants to use it.
So what we're really here, this is like the big coming out party for all you current podcasters to come on over and check out Podtrix, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Everybody's welcome.
You do offer something to the listeners of this podcast.
If you use the code IndiePod during checkout, you'll get 25% off your first 3 months of Podtrix.
That's a good deal.
I'm here to support you guys to be creative. You can contact me by sending an email to hello@podtrix.com. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have.
I encourage everybody to go on to podtrix.com right now and check it out and use the promo code IndiePod to get a little bit of a discount.
And how long is your show on average, Dave? What's an episode run?
If I don't have a guest on, they're about 20 minutes. 25 minutes, give or take.
And if you have a guest on, they run quite a bit longer?
It depends. It could be up to an hour. Like every now and then I'll do a special show on like music or another topic, and those can go well over an hour. I'll put those out every now and then. That's just has nothing to do with beer. It's just like a special edition where we just talk about something else.
I think the interviews probably have a place. I mean, if people are receptive to them, I don't like hearing that they're not about beer or beer adjacent. That might be working against you. I can't say that for sure, though, but it would be cool if those conversations could somehow center around the whole purpose of the podcast, which is beer in front, which suggests it's not just the beer that's in front of you. Drink the beer that's in front of you. It also means that beer is in the forefront of the podcast. So keeping that in mind regularly is probably a good idea. And the marketing side, growing this into a business, I feel like one of the things that is key to this is not just identifying what, and I know that Greg is going to just cringe when he hears this term. He's avoided using it so far, but your ideal avatar, which is terrible. We hate that as a term, but it is what it is. You're trying to build an avatar of who your ideal listener is. I think something else you need to do is work on your personal brand as the beer guy. You're the beer guy. So what can be done to help develop that brand for you? And I think what Jeff talked about with being in local public places. That's harder now, but I think they're lifting a lot of restrictions. It's becoming a little easier. Is there a way for you to do a live version of the show once a month? Is there a way for you to run a beer tasting at a local pub? Is there a way for you to get really into the community locally and establish yourself locally as the beer guy? Now, you might not want to be the Chicago beer guy, but that's where it could start. And, that's the kind of thing that leads to, and this has happened to people that I've worked with in the past, it winds up leading to things like, hey, we need somebody to run a television show for, TLC or Discovery on beer, and we need him in Chicago. And oh my God, look, here's Dave. Maybe we can use Dave.
I did want to go to the content piece a little bit before we go off and do more of the marketing. I like that. I like where that is going there for sure. Going back to the Jagoff thing, I don't mind it as long as it's about or related to beer somehow. To me, but then again, I'm not a beer enthusiast, right? I think the pacing is extremely slow, in my opinion. Anybody else think that everything's a little bit slow with the podcast?
Yeah, I think there is. And tell me if this is right, Dave. Do you feel like if you edit too much, it won't sound natural?
No, not at all. I edit a lot. Like I'm like constantly editing. Maybe I edit too much out of it.
I think he just naturally speaks slowly. I mean, I think it's just the way he is.
I work on that when I'm recording because I think as a rule, without a microphone, I talk very fast. So I want to try to dial that back a little bit so I'm not talking too fast.
I talk too fast, but I think with this, it could use a little bit, even transitioning between sentences and everything. Everything seems to be a little bit slower. Let Tanner and Greg, you can speak to that a little bit more about, from an editing standpoint, what can you do?
Well, in Audacity, there is a feature underneath. Give me a second and I'll tell you right now. I believe it is underneath effects.
Yeah.
Truncate silences.
Yeah. It's called truncate silences. And you can say, listen, if something is silent for more than 1 second, reduce the length of that silence to 0.3 seconds, because the alternative to that is going through very monotonously and tightening up every breath, every in-between sentence, every long pause between words. And it can make a podcast feel over time, the duration of an episode, it can feel like, all right, can we let's pick up speed a little bit. Like watching a movie that starts off slow and never gets fast, never gets to the point. It can feel like that. I noticed it, but there's something about your voice that it didn't bother me. You have a very soothing voice. You have a voice that's quite honestly designed for this kind of work. I feel like you'd make a killing in radio. I think you've got a great voice for narration too. So it didn't bother me, but Jeff brings up a good point. There are people who would probably feel like, all right, we're lagging here. Can we pick this up a bit?
I honestly think it's content more so than reading speed or audible speed, however you want to define that, because the stuff I didn't want to hear seemed like it went on forever. And the stuff I wanted to hear seemed like it was real short, right? Like when you poured a beer, the last episode I listened to, you actually said, and I almost fell out of my chair, you said, I cut out the beer pour for more Jagoffs of the week. And I went, what? Like, dude, I'm here for the beer.
Yeah.
Like, the other thing I think you could do is be a lot more verbose in your actions, which Tanner was saying about the logo of the beer. Remember, there's an audio podcast, right? Say, okay, I'm going to pour it. I'm going to open it. Here's, the head is 1 inch. Wow, it's kind of orange. Be verbose in what you're seeing. Explain it to the audience. Okay, I'm going to take a sip. Oh my, it's a little bitter tones, right? Man, the aftertaste, really be verbose about what's going on because they have to live vicariously through you.
Okay.
And, hey, I'm sitting here looking at the logo. It's kind of interesting. It's got the star on it. Kind of boring. I'm envisioning it. I'm going to put it up on my shelf next to these other cans. Does it grab me? Would I pick this one up if I didn't know about it? Just really get in the storytelling of it. Like that's what it's lacking, is the story of the beer.
Okay. The one thing that I've noticed looking at my numbers, if I do a Chicago beer that I spotlight, my numbers are lower than if I do a craft beer that's a national beer, or even, a beer like a Budweiser or whatever. So this week I'm going to do Corona. Even if you're not a beer drinker, you know of Corona, you've seen the commercials, the Jimmy Buffett, the Snoop Dogg. So I do notice that when I feature more national stuff, the audience is larger. So, and with a beer like that, I'll be able to talk about it more because they've been around longer. There's more background that I could pick up on it.
What about if you had an episode where you featured all of the Coronas or all of the same style of Coronas. You know what I mean? Like, think of it like you're going through the liquor store, grocery store, wherever you live, depending on where it's at. I'm right below you. So I think it's like me, where you can just go to any grocery store and get beer. But, think about it like your listener has limited choices for daily beer, right? They're just getting it from the grocery store, most likely. What would they want? I mean, if you're going to dial into the local, you gotta commit 100% to that, right? And then you'll find the inverse happen with your numbers, because you'll start to grow a local audience. And, right now it seems like if your numbers on the big brands are better, you're just happening across Google searches or podcasting searches, right? It's just, and that's good. That's totally good. That's what you want. But, you want to make sure that you're designing it that way. You want to say before you publish it, this is what I'm going for. Did it work? Right? Like, that intention is critical. I titled it Corona this, because I'm trying to grab these searches. But I do like the local beers too. I think there's all sorts of benefits to that. I mean, on my true crime show, I've noticed that when people do state murders that are very local, people download that like crazy. Like, I don't know if they just like to be able to know where it's at and kind of put a place with a name and an action. But I think you have so many options that the Jagoff thing, just to bring it full circle, you don't have time for that, honestly. Like, there's so many options.
I think you take that, because the thing about the Jagoff thing is he has a lot of passion when he's doing that. It's like the most passionate part of the podcast, Dave. It's like, how do you take that?
I mean, unless I just limit it to like one a week, and as long as it's a not political one, it's, the people holding up a dead guy or something that isn't really I mean, unless you're the dead guy being propped up, who's going to be offended by it? So if I just did one a week and just did some real goofball, story, maybe that's a way to, keep that in. I don't know.
Do you do this show daily?
Weekly.
Oh, why are you saying one a week?
Like one
instead of having like 5 or 6 per episode, just do one that day that I'm recording. I'm sorry.
I think it's got to relate to beer, though, in my opinion. But I mean, somehow. But I can tell you're really passionate about it. That's why I'm like, it's hard to say get rid of it.
Keep coming back to it because we know you're not convinced.
Well, there's also maybe the chance to tie it into a drink responsibly kind of moment. You could say, this is this week's drink responsibly moment, where we look at somebody who did something so stupid they must not have been. Yeah, that might have been that might be a way to make that a little bit more relevant, but keep it, because I can tell the same as these guys can that you don't want to get rid of that. And so maybe there's just a way to rebrand it a little bit.
I actually, maybe 6 months ago, I just got tired of it. I'm like, I'm tired of calling out the same 5 people every week. So I'm trying to find more like oddball stories where it's just not me calling out the same 5 people. So yeah, I do get kind of tired of it, but I also know from like the podcast community, they love it.
Yeah. No offense to them, but just ignore what they say.
Hey, don't, Greg, tell him what you told me before we beat him up too long. You gave me some advice on something to cut out on my podcast. It's a really good example.
The intro.
What about the intro?
So when someone clicks on Jeff's show, and this is controversial because he wants to help a lot of people in the same episode, right? I skip the first 15 minutes of Jeff's show every single time because I'm here for him and the guest. He sold me on it. Right. Think about the top of the funnel for everything marketing related. Jeff is indie podcaster, right? Okay. I'm in. Oh, he's talking to Captain. Oh, I'm in. I get in there and some person I'm sure is a quite fine person is talking for 10 minutes and I'm about to rip my ears off. Right. So I'm like, where's Captain? Where's Captain? Where's Captain? So I'm like, fast forward. Then I hear somebody I don't know. I go, is that Captain? And I'm backing up. So that's just me.
It's not 15 minutes either, by the way.
It used to be. Now it's like 5. Like you've really streamlined it. You've done much better. But content this, and for everyone else who's going to listen to this and, really, it's probably going to offend a lot of people, but content is very subjective and I am not your target audience. I want to be clear to say that, but your target audience isn't super clear. Like anyone listening to your podcast should be able to go, oh, that's not for me. right? And they should be able to go, that's definitely for my friend Jim, and I'm going to recommend it to him because it's clearly for him.
So I'm going to put a link in the description of this episode, and I want you to read it, Dave. Actually, I want anybody listening to read it. It's from a Medium blog called The Creators Hub, and it was a piece of writing advice that I didn't get from here, but I had gotten many years ago and discovered it again through this. I'm not going to be able to find the original source, so I'll just link you to this. But the name of the article is Why You Should Probably Delete Your First Paragraph When You're Writing. And it's a really good piece of advice because it's usually true that the first sentence or even sometimes the full first paragraph is often unimportant shit that you are using to get yourself ready. And I feel like podcasters do this with their intros. I've listened to intros that are as long as Game of Thrones intros, right? They're like minutes long, and you're going to skip it anyway because you want to get right to the content the listener's going to. So what I like to do, and I can't remember how you approach your intro, Dave, you may do this, but I like the idea of, in your case, starting with perhaps reading the story on the back of the can or from the website, starting cold open just with that. And you'll say, and that's the story of this week's featured beer, such and such. And that's what we're going to be talking about next. And then you get that short little bit of music, and then you drop right into the discussion about that beer. So first of all, you're setting that expectation right up front. You're saying, this is what we're talking about. And haven't I grabbed your attention because this isn't what I said last time? And then very little bit of music, 5-10 seconds, maybe not even that long. And then right into what you've just told them you're going to talk about. I like that approach. I don't know how you do yours. I can't recall. Do you go music first?
Yeah, intro music first, the general introduction, what the show is about. This week's beer will be whatever I'm talking about. Then I go into the opening segment.
So let me ask you a quick question. So Tanner, I love that. It was on my list to talk about, like we're aligned so beautifully on that. Is the beginning of your intro canned? Because I think it's canned, and you add at the end, and the beer we're talking about this week.
Yeah, it's the same.
Got to delete that.
Okay. So
do what Tanner says, but I do like that you tell people what the show's about at some point early on, but I mean, I just relate this back to my own experience, right? So on my shows, I tried to automate everything. I tried to say, hello, welcome to True Crime, where we do this, and this, and this, and this, and this, and this, and this. And then I only record on today's show is Jeff, right? And it was no good. It sounded perfect. It was level matched and it sounded so good, but the show didn't really start to get big until I was like, hey, I'm Greg. And I curate these shows to help you find something that you like. And today we're going to do this, this, and this. And all of a sudden it's me. It's my personality. It's different every time. It's
old Greg.
It's old Greg. Right. And I think that's what Jeff and I were talking offline, and we're like, hey, this sounds like one of those canned, like if you're listening to AM radio, like local AM radio, it's like the canned intro where they press the button on the board and then they start talking.
Yeah.
It felt like that. It didn't feel like a podcast, which is very personal, I think.
And that's not something that's uncommon, Dave. Like, you haven't done anything wrong here. Each one of us did it. Greg just told you he did it.
Yeah.
We all start by thinking this is a show, and a show has an intro, just like radio, and it should be 45 to 60 minutes long. Like, we all make those assumptions, and we forget that this is a very free form, Wild West format. We can do whatever the fuck we want, and we don't have to stick to those old, let's say, shibboleths. Ooh, I never get to use that word, shibboleths. Let's shake them off.
I'm going to say shenanigans. Who are we speaking to here, Tanner? Come on. Let's get to the community piece, the kind of the marketability piece. I just threw out the Chicago thing earlier just to kind of set the stage of what then it unfolded. We have to define really what our podcasts are about and who we are trying to get to listen to the podcast. And I think that's kind of where you're at. You said, like, I've got half podcasters and I've got half of maybe who I'm not sure. Maybe you don't know who they are. We got to figure out who that other half is and really try to play into that. There's nothing wrong with the podcasters. Dave, we're going to support you no matter what, buddy. You don't got to worry about pleasing us. We listen because we like you. But that next step that you got to go to is the people that are going to listen to your podcast and a little bit more increments, a little bit higher numbers. So who do you think that is, Dave? Beer enthusiasts, as we're saying, right?
That ideally is what I would like to have more beer people. With Tanner, what you were saying earlier about like the beer guy in Chicago, stuff like that. I know like earlier or last summer, I talked to our state rep who was talking about like the restaurant industry, the beer industry, and what they're doing to get them back on track. She had with the state senator a beer meetup where they went to different breweries and they invited me onto that. So I think slowly but surely, I'm building that like locally. There's other people that are like, that have gotten a hold of me on social media, like, hey, Dave, I'm coming to Chicago this weekend. Where should I go to? Tell me your places to go to. I give them the list. This is what's on this train station. This is what's here. These places are all good. So I'm starting to, get what you were talking about, Tanner. It's building slowly but surely like that way where I'm like a Chicago beer guy to be talked to.
And I would lean into that so hard, Dave, and maybe even talk to the state tourism board. They are always looking for some kind of media contacts that can help them to increase tourism to the state, which of course every state is probably struggling with right now. I don't know that Chicago in particular is a tourist city, but I feel like it's one of those cities that is. Also, consider checking out, and we'll put a link to the description, or rather we'll put a link to this in the description of this episode as well. There's something on Instagram. It's very underused, and I think you'd be perfect for it because you could do this with breweries and pubs and restaurants. They're called Instagram guides. We'll link it in the description of the episode, but check those out because essentially what they are is they allow you to take a sequence of pictures that you have shared in previous posts and compile them. So if you took like 3 pictures from a pub down the street, you can compile them into a single, what's called an Instagram guide, and you can put text between those images. And so you can almost make kind of like a TripAdvisor kind of thing for that pub or that restaurant or whatever it is. And I think that locally, I think that could do something for you in the short term.
Okay, cool. I'll definitely look into that.
I think even if you're not ready to jump fully into I definitely have to sell yourself as a Chicago beer guy. But even if it's episodically like once a month starting out, you're able to just test this out and see how it performs as far as locally speaking, going all in one episode once a month. Then in the meantime, you could still try some of these other ideas like they're talking about, the Corona beer collection or whatever. Then, you have to get to places and get your stuff in front of people that are drinking beer, obviously. That's going to be critical. Oh, Greg, go ahead.
So community, I think, is your biggest challenge and your biggest opportunity, right? So you absolutely have some local things that you can do. I like the Instagram guides thing. I think that's very clever and very smart. I also think your knowledge could be monetizable. So just keep collecting it. Right? Don't worry about selling it now. Just perfect the art of giving recommendations and, like you said, what subway stop is this stuff there or here? Just keep collecting that stuff. Don't lose it. Keep giving it to people. But I think you got to work on your community online. I don't think Twitter is the place for you, most likely. I think you need more multimedia approach to things. I really think you should probably spend the majority of your time on Instagram. If I were to guess, you can do all sorts of photos with just your phone, where you can add a story with it, which actually you can tell your story. You can make, what are they, reels, the longer ones. You build it yourself. This is not a cut from your podcast. This is content just for Instagram. Imagine the Corona thing. Just a picture of the 6 Corona. Here's what they all are. Here's everything in the Corona lineup. Here's how I would rank them. Here's if you like this, you would like this. There's all sorts of, like if you do Google searches, it says what kind of Corona is like, and there'll be like a list of 10 other beers that it's like, I bet. So this is the kind of stuff when you start to build your community, you just put your podcast in your bio and I wouldn't even mention your podcast probably for a very long time. I would start to build your little beer community on Instagram, and people will go to your bio. You know how I know this is because when I started to get my fandom podcast started, I went out and bought like 15 or 20 links in Instagram people's bios. I just bought the links for like a month. These people were not on the podcast. They had nothing to do with the podcast. They just talked about Spider-Man. And my show went from 100 downloads to like 4,000 downloads. Just with a simple buying links on people's bios.
Nerd culture.
And also, do you have a website, Dave?
I do. I haven't done much with it, and the traffic I get, it actually, I think, expires tomorrow. I mean, I kept the domain name.
What's the domain name?
Beerinfront.com.
Okay. Well, I have really exciting news for you. ChicagoBeerGuy.com is available, and I would suggest immediately getting that. Yeah. And I would also suggest that you need to start using, as Greg was just saying, you need more multimedia. You also need to start building a body of work around you being a beer guy. So what I would suggest you do is stand up a website. Maybe it's a pod page or a podcastpage.io. I use podpage.com. So if you wanted to use that, you could. So I think it's something like $10 or $15 a month. And you have the ability to, all your podcast episodes are listed there. You can have blog entries and you can have media in those blog entries. So what I would encourage you to do is once a week, I would write a review on a beer. Don't include it in the podcast. Mention it in the podcast, but send them to the website to read it. Google is going to start being able to index that body of work the more you write. I would also suggest that you, for every episode you have, when it is automatically published to Podpage, which is a benefit of it, it just automatically sees the episode, publishes it new, it's got its own dedicated page. Go in there and edit that content and get a picture of the can. Get a picture of the beer in the bottle with the can next to it. Make it pretty and start building that. Because if you're going to become the Chicago beer guy, which you are, my dude, then you're going to need those things. You're going to want those things. And I think that'll be killer.
Okay. Very good.
Yeah, I would say don't be afraid to put in the groundwork too. Look up Reddit posts, blogs. There's still a lot of stuff out there with beer. I'd say don't be afraid to put in a little bit of groundwork. I mean, legwork, it will go a long way as far as connecting with people once you feel comfortable with how you've branded yourself, Chicago beer guy. Don't be afraid to put in the legwork, though, and find new people. I think it'd make a big difference.
Dave, try it out. Try it out right now. Go, hey, everybody, I'm Dave. I'm the Chicago beer guy. You can find me at chicagobeerguy.com. Let's hear it.
Hey, guys, I'm Dave. I'm the Chicago beer guy. You could find me at chicagobeerguy.com.
It's perfect. The podcast
so
can still be Beer in Front, but I think it's the Beer in Front podcast hosted by the Chicago beer guy.
Exactly. And then you go into your podcast RSS and put Chicago beer guy as the author dash and your first and last name.
Oh my God. It's great. Yeah.
Okay.
That's good. Tanner, that's a good one.
And I think this was all my idea. I'm going to give myself the credit for the Chicago pitch.
We had no doubt you would, Jeff.
No, this is amazing, though. I thank everybody for meeting up and doing this. Dave, I think like we started out with the beginning, obviously we got a lot of people that said they wanted to do this. But listening to yours, we could tell that it's good. It's not like we're here just Greg might be beating you down because that's just what Greg does to everybody. But no one's saying it's bad by any means. But in fact, we picked you because we felt like, hey,
there's something here.
This is a really great place to start.
And I call people jagoffs all day. I could take criticism. Yeah.
I don't want to end up on your show, please.
You will be on next week, Greg.
Yeah.
It's all in love, man. It's all in love.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those are my closing thoughts. Tanner, what do you have?
Just to echo what the other guys have said, we chose you because we think you do have a lot of potential. Not to say that other people didn't also have potential, but you had what we thought in the initial application process. I guess you had some significant potential because of the niche, because of your voice, because of your personality. You're a personable guy. You're a gruff sounding Chicagoite, if that's a word. Sorry if it's not. And I think that is an attractive thing for listeners. You've got a great personality, a great voice. I think your content's good. And we believe that you can be much better than you are with just, a few tweaks, some of which we talked about. So I think what we'll need to do and what we'll want to do is follow up with you in 30 days and see on what advice you've taken action and where you're at. Maybe we could have him back, Jeff, and check in with him.
Sounds good. I'm game.
Take us home. All right. One thing that drew me to this podcast, your cover art, I feel like you have the beer guy X factor, whatever that is. You have the thing. You sound like the guy I want to take beer advice from. You look like the guy I want to take beer advice from. You live in Chicago, right? You live in a city that, has good beer. So we really appreciate you being on the show. We hope we've helped, and I hope we haven't hurt you in any way.
Not at all.
Our goal is to elevate you. I think that you do have a monetizable podcast that could make you a living if you do the hard work, right? If you're willing to start something and go, oh, okay, well, that's not working. I'm going to change it, right? Like you have to be able to cut it. You got to be able to cut stuff that doesn't work. And if you can bring yourself to do that, I think it will serve you for the next several years while this economic engine is getting built. And when it makes $1, by the way, do not put it in your pocket. Buy some ads.
Buy those ads, baby.
That's exactly what I'm saying. Although you can do what you want.
Mine goes to beer, but yeah.
That's a business expense.
Yeah.
Oh, well, Dave, we talked about a lot of different things of rebranding here, but do want to give you the final words here on the where to find you, what's going on. Obviously, we're going to talk more and work more at this website thing, but go ahead.
Well, Jeff, Tanner, Greg, I do appreciate it. I took nothing personal. I appreciate the constructive criticism. Like I said, I call people out all day, so my skin is really thick. My show is Beer in Front. You could find it on all the major platforms, your Good Pods, your Spotify's, Apple's, et cetera. I'm on social media, on Instagram and Twitter at Beer in Front as well. I also have a Discord server, Beer in Front, if you want to join me there.
Incredible. Couldn't have said it any better myself. Well, hey, we appreciate everybody listening. We'll be back next time with somebody else. Sorry, I hit puberty there, losing my voice. Getting scared about this damn winter storm coming up, guys. I got to get off here. I got to get to the grocery store. I've got to get eggs. I've got to get milk. I've got to get bread. Until next time, thanks for listening. Thanks for listening, and thanks for telling a friend. But more importantly, thank you for supporting independent content creators. If you're enjoying the podcast or like the work we're doing in the indie podcaster community, I ask you to tell just one fellow content creator that hasn't heard of this podcast or the work we're doing and share it with them. But more importantly, I hope you continue with me on this journey as the indie podcaster. Keep being you. Keep being great.
And the question is, do I stay here? Will you be back? Are you gonna come back? Will you be back? Are you coming back?